Greetings fellow gorehounds and welcome back to another Blood Splattered vlog. So full disclosure, I was recently sent this Blu-ray as a screener for this movie, Pool Party Massacre, so that I could watch it and review it on my show. And let me just say before I get to the actual review portion of this, that holy crap, I love the cover art on this Blu-ray. It's got this really cool and cheesy retro look that reminds me a whole lot of slasher VHS tapes from the 80s and 90s. And you all know me, I love that retro 80s stuff, so this looked like it was right up my alley. And sure enough, it pretty much was, though there is a lot of caveats there. Because Pool Party Massacre here, at the end of the day, is a micro-budget film. It was made extremely on the cheap, and it shows. The acting is terrible, the cinematography is atrocious, and the script is even worse than all that. Just a whole bunch of highly repetitive dialogue of characters that you despise from the get-go and have no redeeming value. And on top of that, this movie legitimately uses royalty-free music that I've used in my own videos. So yeah, this is not a piece of high art in the slightest, but with all that being said, Pool Party Massacre still does a really good job of capturing the feel of shitty VHS horror movies from the 80s. And I definitely got the feeling while watching the movie, if you were to slap some VHS grain or some old film stock grain in general on the movie, it could have gone on the shelf right next to something like Toolbox Murders, and it would have felt right at home. And of all the things in the movie, the thing that works the most is the slasher portion. So I guess what I'm getting at here is Pool Party Massacre is an extremely bad film, almost to downright incompetence, but despite that, it's a lot of fun. It warmed my black nostalgic heart and reminded me of when I used to rent VHSs of shitty horror movies that I knew were awful, but I still had fun with. Anyway, if you would like to purchase Pool Party Massacre for yourself so you can experience the cheesy goodness all on your own, then be sure to click the link I will provide in the description below and buy a copy for yourself, and if you do, using that link, I will get a kickback. And with all that said, my fellow gorehounds, let us finally move on to the spoilers. Alrighty then, so this movie has a very simple setup. It's essentially about a bunch of rich 20-somethings who used to be like the most popular girls in high school, but now they've kind of become these aimless post-college bitches who really have nothing going for them in life except for the fact that they're worth a lot of money. And one of these women decides to throw a pool party at her parents' house because they're out of town, so she has it all to herself. And so she invites all her old college friends to the party, including her non-bitchy friend, who is one of the few characters in the whole movie who's actually likable. Partially because she's the only one who didn't come from money, and partially because she's actually written to actually have empathy, whereas all the other characters are written to be as bitchy and as selfish as humanly possible. And believe me, like, the first 20 minutes of this movie is fucking insufferable listening to these characters talk to one another. You just want to see them die already. And on top of that, the dialogue scenes are also extremely expository. There's not a lot of showing, there's a shit ton of telling. So most of the information you learn about these characters is through what they tell you about themselves and not who they really are. Which in some ways that almost works for the simple reason that it got across the idea that these characters are extremely vapid and shallow and aren't really full, complete people in and of themselves. But at that point, I think I'm giving the movie just a little too much credit. Anyway, so at the beginning of this movie, I thought I was gonna hate it based on all these dialogue scenes and all these characters, and just the way it was filmed was really bland and boring. But then we get a few slasher kills. We get one at the very beginning of the movie in the epilogue, and then another about 20 or 15 minutes into the movie. And that's when it became very clear what kind of movie this is. This movie is a movie with terrible acting, terrible dialogue, terrible writing, but really fun kills. In other words, it perfectly captures the Z-grade slasher film you would have found on the VHS shelf back in the 80s. And once I realized that, in between all the groaning throughout the dialogue scenes that I was doing, when a kill would actually happen and a character would get their due, I was grinning like a madman and I felt like I was 12 again, and that was a really good feeling. So anyway, once all the characters arrive at the party, it follows the very basic slasher formula. You have a character who walks off and does something and then gets picked off, usually right before we learn something very important about them that either made us empathize with them or made us think that they deserve to die. And let's be fair, in this movie, most of the time it's they deserve to die. There's a few sex scenes, there's some tits, there's some blood. But like I said earlier, this movie is extremely micro-budget. Like, the pool party in this movie is essentially a bunch of rich bitches just sitting around a pool. No one's swimming, singing, no one's dancing, they're just sitting there on their phones, not getting wet in the slightest. And for some of the characters, it's actually written into the script why they wouldn't do it, because they don't want to get their hair wet. But even still, you could definitely tell that they were writing around the fact that they couldn't do certain things because of budgetary restrictions. Anyway, eventually a couple dudes arrive who weren't supposed to be at the party but arrived anyway. You know, the basic thing that happens every time there's a slasher movie and some sort of slumber party. There's always a point where the guys arrive and they weren't supposed to be there, but the girls are happy to see them, and then a couple characters hook up and then get killed, which is exactly what happens in this movie. But one of the male characters introduced is the character that on the script level should have been the character that I hated the most in the movie, but ended up being my favorite character in the whole movie. And that's this one extremely sleazy dude who just keeps hitting on all the girls and using all these awful pickup lines. And at one point he tries to hit on this one character by telling her about these crazy fan theories about 80s teen movies. And even though he was sleazy and all his pickup lines were ridiculous, I actually found myself endearing to him. To the point where I really wanted to see this character get laid before he died. I wanted to see one of his lines succeed with these women, but he doesn't. He ends up dying in the bathroom jacking off to a portrait of the main character's mom. And like I said, that scenario right there should make him an extremely unlikable jerk, but because of how unlikable that main character is, yeah, you kind of like that this guy is basically disrespecting her by doing this, so you're like, fuck yeah, you do it, dude. But then of course the slasher has to ruin it by showing up and drilling through his back. Though I will admit, that kill is fucking great. And it's especially great because there's this great setup where the slasher is going to kill him, but then like a pizza guy arrives, so he kills the pizza guy first. So you end up with 2 kills for the price of 1, and you know what? I loved it. Rock on, movie. The more kills, the better. Anyway, I'm not sure what more there is to analyze about this movie. You basically know the formula already. You kind of know which characters are going to end up alive at the end versus which ones are all going to be fucking dead. So I don't really need to spoil that for you, but I guess what I could go into is the actual ending. Because there is a twisty twist, and the twisty twist is one of the parts of the movie that I love the most. So if anything I've said so far has made you want to see this movie, then you need to stop right now because I'm about to get to the real spoilers. The spoilers to end all spoilers. Not really, I'm exaggerating, but anyway, at the end of this movie, it turns out that, oh my god, the slasher is actually the main character's brother. And these 2 characters have been colluding with one another because she wanted to kill all the stupid, crazy, rich bitches that she went to high school with. And she wanted to get famous in the process so she could be the survivor girl of this slasher scenario. So basically, the ending's like a cross between Scream 1 and Scream 2's endings. And naturally, as a result of this twist, this means that the actual final girl is the character who is not rich and is actually kind of likable. Now, the reason why I like this twist so much, aside from the fact that I legitimately did not see it coming, when they introduced the brother, the actual slasher in the movie, oh my god, I fucking love this guy. He's the only actor in the entire movie who acts with any sincerity to where you actually believe the words that are coming out of his mouth. And on top of that, I love how laissez-faire he is about his slasher killing. It's just like, oh man, I am having a good time. Gee golly, I'm killing people. And I don't know, there was just something about this character when he's introduced that just put a huge smile on my face. And truth be told, his interactions with his sister are some of the few jokes in the movie that 100% land. I laughed my ass off during this twist. Whereas a lot of the humor from earlier in the movie didn't work as much for me aside from the actual slasher kills, these 2 interacting with each other 100% worked, and their dialogue scene is probably the best written in the whole movie. Now, it's hard to tell if that's because it's the best written or the best acted, but either way, it works the best. So yeah, that's the twist of this movie, and that's basically all there is to talk about with this movie. It's a very basic slasher movie with a lot of fun mixed in and a lot of shit. So if you're like me and you're used to wading through the shit to get to the gold, then you will have a good time with this movie. But if you're not into wading through that kind of shit, then you might want to avoid it. Because trust me, I know these kind of shitty slasher movies are not for everybody. And with that all said, my fellow gorehounds, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so that you're notified of my videos immediately upon their upload. And as I always say, peace out, my fellow gorehounds, and I'll catch y'all later.